Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
So this talk is going to be an overview of lattice reduction algorithms, and in particular strong lattice reduction algorithms. If at some stage I go too fast, don't hesitate stopping me. Okay, so in crypto, lattice reduction is used in many areas, but it's very common also in crypto. And in crypto, there are two main contexts where you may want to use lattice reduction. So one, which I suppose is the main topic today, is related to lattice-based crypto systems. So for example, N-True or all crypto systems based on CIS or LWE, the two most famous problems related to lattice-based cryptography, and also all known fully homomorphic encryption schemes. So if you want to attack them, all these crypto systems, the best generic attacks rely on, the best known generic attacks rely on lattice reduction. So in these cases, in this setup, usually the dimensions are huge. So think of several hundreds or more likely several thousands. The entries of the inputs, so the inputs are matrices, and the entries are typically very small. So that doesn't really matter, the bit size of the entries. And it's a very expensive task. Okay, so one goal of the talk will be to assess how expensive it is. And the second context, which is a bit older, it's lattices to break other types of crypto systems. And probably the most famous case is a variant of the RSA encryption scheme via Coppersmith method. So Coppersmith method allows you to find small roots of polynomials. And for this, it uses lattice reduction. In these cases, so the context is a bit different. In these cases, the dimensions are still large, but less, so maybe 200. But the entries are gigantic. So we are speaking of entries of more than 10,000 bits. And but anyway, it's less costly. It's less costly because we ask for less. We ask for less strong lattice reduction.
What is less costly?
This application, lattice reduction for this application. Yes. Okay, so the goal of this talk is to have an introductive overview of lattice reduction algorithms and not go too deep into the details. So I'm going to recall some background on lattices and then explain how we get to lattice reduction. And I'll describe in more details the Bloch-Corkin-Zolotayev algorithm due to Schnorr, which is the main lattice reduction algorithm used today. And I will apply what we obtain with the BKZ algorithm. I will apply it to solving the SIS problem, the small integer solution problem. And then I'll discuss some practical aspects of lattice reduction if I have sufficient time. Okay, so here is the first lattice of the day. So it's a set of green points. It's a regular set of points in dimension 2. So they form a lattice, and these lattices, as soon as these lattices, even in dimension 1, they are infinite. So you have an infinite number of points. And to represent them, obviously, you don't represent the list of the points. So the way they are represented is with bases. So here we have a blue basis, two vectors. They form a basis of the green lattice, because any point in the green lattice is an integer linear combination of the two blue vectors, and vice versa. So if you take this point, it's twice this one, and 3 times this one. So that's how we define the basis, and that's how we represent lattices most often in practice. Because bases, you can store them as matrices by just storing the basis vectors as the columns of a matrix. Okay, and then the lattice becomes the set of all integer linear combinations of the columns of that matrix. Okay, so the first observation is that bases are not unique. So for example, here I have another basis of the same lattice. So again, if you take the set of all integer linear combinations of these red vectors, you also end up with a green lattice. So what we can see here is that some bases are more easy to deal with than others. So for example, if I give you this point, it's very easy to see that it's twice this vector plus one times, twice this vector plus one times this one. But if I ask you how many times this vector and this vector, it's not very hard, but it takes a bit longer. So one can see here that intuitively we are going to like the blue basis a bit more than the red one. So as soon as the dimension is at least 2, greater or equal to 2, we have an infinity of an infinite number of bases, but we know how to move from one basis to another. And the rule to move from one basis to another is to right multiply the basis matrix by a square integer matrix whose determinant is plus or minus 1. So why plus or minus 1? Because these are the integer transforms that are invertible. So we call these matrices unimodular matrices. So to move from one basis to another, we can right multiply by something which is called a unimodular matrix.
What about left axis? If you multiply from left?
If you multiply from left, you don't keep the same set of points. You don't keep the lattice.
That will change.
Yeah, it will change the lattice. So for example, we are going to left multiply at some stage, but typically left multiplying changes the geometry of the space, changes how you look at the space, how you look at the ambient space. Okay, lattice reduction. So the intuitive goal is to find a rather short basis given an arbitrary basis of the lattice. So I'm giving you an arbitrary basis of the lattice, and the goal is to find a rather short basis of the same lattice. Or put differently, a transformation matrix that maps the arbitrary basis to something short. Okay, so how do we measure short? We measure short by comparing with lattice invariants. And there are two very important lattice invariants. One is the minimum of a lattice. So how do I define the minimum? I take a ball around 0, a very small ball. So 0 is always in the lattice, so it's not a very interesting point in the lattice. So we take a ball around 0 and we increase the radius of the ball. And for a while, we never hit another lattice point. And the first time we hit another lattice point, so here it's this radius, when we hit another lattice point, then the radius of the ball is the minimum. So it's the norm of the smallest non-zero vector in the lattice, the Euclidean norm. So in all this talk, I'm going to stick to the Euclidean norm. Okay, another important invariant. So the minimum is it's obvious that it's a lattice invariant because it's not defined with respect to any particular basis. So if you take any basis, the minimum remains the same. For the determinant, so the determinant, you take any basis, you take its basis matrix, and you look at the absolute value of its determinant. So that's the definition of the determinant of a lattice. It's a bit less obvious that it's an invariant, but if you recall from the previous slide, we know how to move from one basis to another. It's via unimodular transforms. So we right multiply by a matrix whose determinant is plus or minus 1. And then if you right multiply a matrix with a determinant who is plus or minus 1, you keep the determinant because the determinant is multiplicative. So the determinant is the same for any basis of the given lattice. And geometrically speaking, it's the area of the parallelepiped spanned by the basis vectors. So you take the basis vectors, you look at the spanned fundamental parallelepiped, and the area of this parallelepiped is the volume or the determinant of the lattice. So here, that's another basis of the same lattice, and the area is equal to the blue area. And there is a very famous theorem that allows us to link these two minima. It's due to Minkowski. So it says that the first minimum, or the minimum of the lattice, is smaller than square root of n, where n is the dimension of the lattice, times the nth root of the determinant of the lattice for any lattice. So that's an interesting theorem for us because from a computational viewpoint, so because we are going to see that lambda is very hard to compute, that's even hard to approximate for a given lattice, whereas the determinant is always easy to compute from a basis. So you have a basis, you can just compute the determinant of the matrix, and you have the determinant of the lattice. So that's computable in polynomial time, whereas this one is going to be very hard to compute. So Minkowski theorem allows us to link something which is very hard to compute, and that we are interested in, to something which is rather easy to compute. Okay, so I can refine a little bit the definition of lattice reduction. So we want to find a basis. So given an arbitrary basis of the lattice, we want to find a basis which is short compared to the minimum, because it's short compared to the best that can be achieved, or is short compared to the nth root of the determinant, because we could be interested in having a practical variant like of Minkowski theorem. Instead of trying the shortest one, try to find something which is small compared to the determinant to the 1 over n. Okay, so some computational problems related to lattices. So the most famous one is the shortest vector problem. It comes with a parameter gamma. So first, let's think of gamma equal 1, which is the hardest case. So we are given the basis of a lattice, and we want to find a vector b which is non-zero, because 0 is always obvious to find, and whose norm is smaller than lambda. And there is only one possibility. If your lattice vector of norm smaller than lambda and non-zero, the norm has to be equal to lambda. So the shortest vector problem asks you to find a vector in the lattice with smallest non-zero norm. And when you put a relaxation factor gamma bigger or equal to 1, then the problem becomes easier and easier. So what it asks is that instead of finding an optimal solution, you ask for a vector b which is no more than gamma times longer than the shortest than the optimal solution. So you can ask for, I don't know, like b is no more than n times longer than the minimum of the lattice. We can have also a variant, an effective variant of Minkowski theorem, which I'll call HSVP. So given a basis, we want to find a vector b whose norm is smaller than the determinant to the 1 over n times a relaxation factor gamma. So Minkowski theorem says that if you can solve SVP with factor gamma, you can solve the effective Minkowski theorem with factor gamma square root of n. Because lambda is smaller than root n times the nth root of the determinant. And there are many other problems that we may see today: bounded distance decoding, CVP, closest vector problem, unique SVP, shortest independent vector problem, and so on and so forth. They all come with relaxation parameters. So when gamma is close to 1, all these problems are very hard to solve computationally. And when gamma increases, they become easier and easier. So I'm not going to comment on these problems in this talk. Okay, so here are the bad news. When gamma is very small, SVP is NP-hard. So it's almost NP-hard. It's NP-hard under randomized reductions. But for all practical purposes, it means the same. So it's very unlikely that we can find an efficient solution to SVP when the dimension increases. And it remains NP-hard when gamma increases slightly, and then at some stage, it's not NP-hard anymore. But still, we don't have efficient solutions. And the smallest gamma for which we have a polynomial time algorithm is almost exponential in the dimension. So the smallest gamma for which we can solve all these problems in polynomial time is 2 to the n times log n over log n. Okay, and when gamma is polynomial in n, the cost of the best known algorithms is, okay, m is n, so that's a typo, is poly of n times log b times 1 plus n over log gamma to the 1 plus n over log gamma. So it's for gamma polynomial in n, this is exponential in n over log gamma. Okay, and if you want to make this term polynomial, indeed you get gamma equal this quantity. Okay, so for small gamma, what should be remembered, for small means polynomial gamma, the cost is at least, the best known algorithm is exponential. Okay, so let's see how we get these results. And so we'll go progressively and try to give the intuition of why we do things like we do for lattice reduction. So first, I'm going to simplify a little bit the problem and decrease the number of variables. So if you look at the goal, we have B, which is full rank, and we want to find a unimodular matrix such that BU has small coefficients. So it's a problem with n squared inputs. There are n squared coefficients in B. So the first step is to reduce the number of interesting variables in B. So first thing I'm going to do is to triangularize B with the following observation. So the Euclidean norm is invariant under rotations. So if I take a vector and I apply a rotation to it, the norm is the same. So I can work modulo rotations. So what this means is that I can multiply B by any orthogonal Q on the left. So it just means I take my vector space and I rotate its representation. And I take a Q orthogonal in order to make so B equal Q times something which is upper triangular now. So for example, for the first vector, it means that I apply a rotation to the first vector so that it becomes aligned with the x-axis. And then I keep doing this to triangularize the basis. So this is QR factorization, and I can, when we do QR factorization, we can impose that the diagonal coefficients of R are all positive, up to multiplying the columns of Q by plus or minus 1, which keeps it orthogonal. Okay, so a few things related to R. R11 is the norm of B1. Because I have aligned B1 along the x-axis. So now R11 is the norm of B1. And RII, the i's coefficient on the diagonal of R, so these coefficients are very important for what follows. RII is the norm of the projection of BI orthogonally to the previous vectors. So I take, for example, so R11 is the norm of B1, R22 would be the norm of B2 after projection orthogonally to B1. And R33 is going to be the norm of B3 after projection orthogonally to B1 and B2. And you keep going like this. And if you prefer, you can look at QR factorization as Gram-Schmidt orthogonalization. Mathematically speaking, it's exactly the same thing. It's equivalent up to a diagonal matrix multiplication. And it encodes exactly the same information. But I prefer to use QR factorization because it's more compact and you have all the information on R that you can extract easily. Whereas with Gram-Schmidt orthogonalization, you have to play with what we call the mu ij's and the norm of the Gram-Schmidt vectors. So it's a bit less compact to deal with. Yes? We don't really mind. We are really interested in BU. And in fact, you can't have both. Because if U has small coefficients, you cannot do too many operations on B. So you cannot make BU arbitrarily small for a bounded U. But in some applications, it's actually relevant. Okay, so now I've got essentially n squared over 2 variables. So I'm going to go from n squared over 2 to n variables with what is called size reduction. Okay, so our goal now, we have R upper triangular, And something that I didn't say is that when you do QR factorization, computing Q and R is polynomial time, so you can do it efficiently. Okay, given R, upper triangular, I want to find a U such that RU is small, or RU has a small R factor. So the R factor is the R prime of RU equal Q prime R prime. Because when I apply U, I may change the needed orthogonal transformation Q. Okay, so I want to find U such that RU has a small R factor. Okay, so let's look at R. And in this R, so I have a diagonal and off-diagonal coefficients. Let's say I want to make this one small. So if I was allowed any transformations, I would do this column minus this column divided by Rii times Rij. So the effect of this would be to make this term 0. So I would just annihilate this term using the correct multiple of this column. But unfortunately, I cannot do that because if you do this, the coefficient you use for this column may not be integral. So the Rij over Rii may not be an integer, and you are restricted to integer transformations. If you don't do integer transformations, you lose the lattice. So what we do is the next best thing. We don't take Rij over Rii, we take the nearest integer to it. Okay, and the effect of this is that, okay, so this changes this coefficient, and it makes the new one, the new Rij, smaller than half of Rii. So it makes this smaller than half of this. And it's a valid operation because it's unimodular, so the determinant is obviously 1. It's a triangular with 1s on the diagonal, and it's an integer transformation.
That symbol actually, or scaling close in minus that symbol you are using,
Closest integer 2.
closest integer.
It's
Where it's like
rounded.
just round up.
Yes. And sometimes there are two best, and if there are two best, you take the one you want. Okay. So while doing this, you've cleaned up, you've made this coefficient smaller. So you've made some progress with respect to the goal. You've made this coefficient smaller, but you may have changed other coefficients in this column. So maybe you had made progress on other coefficients before, and you've killed the prior progress by making progress on this coefficient. Okay, so what we should observe is that when you do this column minus a multiple of this one, it doesn't change all coefficients of this column. It changes only the top coefficients, because this is 0. So that's where we use the fact that R is upper triangular. It's very important here that R is upper triangular, because when we subtract a multiple of this one to this column, it kills only these coefficients. So we've made these ones smaller, but we may have made these ones a bit larger. But that's fine, because now we can proceed from bottom to top. So if I clean this one, and then clean this one, and then clean this one, and so on and so forth, at the end, I've cleaned the whole column. So clean in the sense that now every coefficient in that column is going to be smaller than half its corresponding diagonal coefficient. Okay, and we call this size reduction. Okay, so we can do this for column J, but we can do this for all columns. And the nice aspect of it is that now all the off-diagonal coefficients are smaller than half their corresponding diagonal coefficients. So if you make the diagonal coefficients small, then you are done. With size reduction, you can make all the rest smaller. So now the goal is just to make the diagonal of R smaller, because we know how to deal with the off-diagonal coefficients. And we know how to deal with them in polynomial time. You can check that this algorithm is all polynomial time. Okay, so where are we? We have R, which is up triangular, and we want to find U unimodular such that the R factor of RU has small diagonal coefficients. So now we look only at the diagonal because the rest we know how to deal with. And that's actually what is computationally hard. Make the diagonal of R small. Okay, so one more observation. The product of the diagonal coefficients is constant. So why is it constant? Because the product of the diagonal coefficients of R, that's the determinant of R, and the determinant of Q times R is the determinant of R, because Q is orthogonal. So the determinant of R is always the determinant of the lattice. So the product of the diagonal coefficients of R is always the determinant of the lattice. And so this product is constant. There is no way we can make the product arbitrarily small. It's a constant. So if we want to make the diagonal coefficient small, it means that some other coefficients are getting large. So, or put differently, making them small is the same as making them balanced. So making the max smaller is the same as making the diagonal coefficients of R balanced. Or, also put differently, preventing them from decreasing too fast. So you take two consecutive diagonal coefficients. If they decrease very fast, it means that as the product is constant, it means that the first are large and the ending ones are small. Okay, so our goal will be to make them balanced or to prevent them from decreasing. Okay, so before actually saying how to do it, what is the best we can achieve? So arguably the best is HKZ reduction, Hermite-Korkin-Zolotarev. So how is it defined? We have R upper triangular is said HKZ reduced if R11 is the shortest you can get, so it's the minimum of the lattice spanned by the column of R. So R11 is as small as possible. And if you take the bottom n-1 times n-1 square submatrix, so the rest, once you've removed the first row and the first column, this rest should be HKZ reduced as well. So it means that R11 is as small as it gets. And then once you forget about the first column and second column, R22 is at most as small as it can be. And then R33 is as small as it can be in the remaining lattice, and so on and so forth. Okay, so in this definition, you have n times the minimum of the lattice. So R11 is the minimum of an n-dimensional lattice, and R22 is the minimum of an n-1 dimensional lattice. R33 is the minimum of an n-2 dimensional lattice, and so on and so forth. So we may ask, how small are these? So for R11, the less small you can get for R11 is square root n times the determinant to the 1 over n. Because there is Minkowski's theorem. The Minkowski's theorem tells you that lambda 1 is always smaller than root n times the nth root of the determinant. So the less small you can get for R11 is root n times the determinant to the 1 over n. So similarly for Rii, the less small you can get is Minkowski's theorem applied to the corresponding lattice. So the corresponding lattice has dimension n minus I plus 1. So that's the bottom right part of the R factor. Square root n minus I plus 1 times the 1 over n minus I plus 1th root of the determinant of the corresponding lattice. And the corresponding lattice is the bottom square n minus 1 plus 1 times n minus 1 plus 1 submatrix of R, which is diagonal. And its determinant is just the product of the diagonal coefficients, which are the remaining RJJs. So Rii, the less small it can get, is square root n minus I plus 1 times the product of the remaining RJJs to the 1 over n minus I plus 1. Okay. So that's, if you do HKZ, that's the less good the output basis can be. And if you have these equations, so there are n of these, fixing the last diagonal coefficient of R fixes the other RIs. So why? So let's see. So Rn is fixed, and now let's look at Rn minus 1 and minus 1. So you have Rn minus 1 s minus 1 equal square root of 2 times Rn minus 1 and minus 1 Rnn to the 1 over 2. So if Rnn is fixed, then you have a fixed value for Rn minus 1 and minus 1. And you keep going like this. So once Rn minus 1, once the last two are fixed, the third last has a fixed value. And you keep going upwards like this. And you get values for all the RIs depending on Rnn. Okay, and you can solve. I mean, that's a sequence defined by a recurrence relationship. You can solve for it and try to find the coefficients. But first, before giving the solution, I'm going to change notations and go from the RIs that are multiplicative. So with the RIs, we do like multiplications all the time, to the xi's, which are the logarithms of the RI, to get additions instead. Because it's a bit easier to play with and to represent. So I'm going to move from multiplications to additions via the logarithm. Okay, so that's the profile of the worst case solution. So if you solve these equations, so the formula you get is ugly, but it has a nice asymptotic estimation. And the asymptotic estimation is log square of n minus 1 I plus 1 in the exponent. So the log of RI is essentially log square of n minus I plus 1. So how does it look like? It looks like this. So it's concave. And at the start, it's very flat. And at the end, it decreases a bit faster. But not very fast, actually, quite slowly.
I missed your notation. Was lambda in the shortest vector in the lattice or the?
Yes. Yes. Lambda is the norm of a shortest lattice vector. Okay, and this is the best you can achieve on the diagonal of R. Yes.
So how tight is this Minkowski theorem? Is it like for random lattices it's tight?
It's for random lattices, it's tight up to a constant factor. So it's the constant factor is in front of here, and in here it doesn't even play a role. This constant factor here, the big O factor comes from the square root n. But for random lattices, it's rather tight.
For basis reduction, we want to find the unimodular U, but we are now only finding the diagonal.
Yeah, so the unimodular U. Yeah, I didn't tell you how I find an HKZ reduced basis. So that's what is that's why I'm cheating a little bit. I'm just saying the best we can achieve, but I'm not saying how I find this HKZ reduced basis.
Okay.
So the way to find it is to solve. So that's exactly here actually. Is to solve for SVP. So to compute R11, I solve SVP on the lattice, and this gives me integer coefficients that I can use as a U. And then I solve SVP in dimension n-1 and solve SVP in dimension n-2 and so on and so forth. And this allows me to get a full matrix U, a full unimodular matrix.
So we are calculating the solution without solving the SVP, without really reducing the.
No, so
basis.
here really solving SVP. So that's why it's an ideal solution, because I'm not going to do this. It's the best we can achieve, but I'm not going to do this, at least in dimension n. Because the time and space are exponential in n. So that's a lot. So if you have a small dimensional lattice, you may try to do it, small being around 100 at the moment. If it gets larger, there is no chance. But I'm going to use it anyway with smaller dimensions. Okay, so lattice reduction. So we are given an R, which is up triangular, and we want to find a unimodular U such that the R factor of RU has small diagonal coefficients, or balanced, or not decreasing too fast. HKZ is too expensive, so what can we do? There are two main strategies, and a lot of algorithms built around these two main strategies. So first strategy, due to Lenstra and Lovaas 30 years ago, they say if there is too much decrease between RI and RI plus 1, I plus 1, swap vector I and I plus 1. And hopefully, by swapping, you decrease the first of the two and you increase the second of the two. So you make them a little bit more balanced locally. So that's one strategy, and it works fine, but it doesn't give very strong lattice reduction. Another strategy, due to Schnorr in the mid-80s, is to balance the diagonal coefficients locally by applying HKZ on a square diagonal subblock of the matrix R. So you take a diagonal submatrix of R of manageable dimension, and you apply HKZ on this square diagonal submatrix. So you do the expansive thing, but in a smaller dimension. So what does it mean? So I have my R, and say I look at this diagonal subblock. I'm going to take this as input to HKZ. I get a unimodular matrix U HKZ. So if I do this times this, I get something small or balanced. And now I apply this transformation locally to this block within the whole R. So that means I keep the first columns, I apply U to the block, and I keep the last columns. So this has the effect of locally balancing the diagonal coefficients. And then, based on these two ideas, you have many variants, different strategies. You can be adaptive. So adaptive means you look at the actual shape of the RIIs and try to apply the things where you think it's most intelligent. Say you apply where there is the largest decrease of the RIIs, or you apply it where it's less expensive. I don't know, adaptive strategies. You have non-adaptive strategies. So you do the same thing all over again, independently of the values of the RIIs. And you can have greedy strategies and so on and so forth. Okay, so now I can describe the BKZ algorithm. And the BKZ algorithm is going to be non-adaptive, but it's actually the best we know how to do, the best we can do in practice at the moment. Okay, so what is HKZ? So we look at k dimension. So there is a fixed k called the block size. So B is for block, and KZ is for Corkin-Zolotareff. So I apply Corkin-Zolotareff or Hermite-Corkin-Zolotareff on blocks. So we fix the block size, k, and we apply HKZ to any k-dimensional diagonal submatrix of R. So what does it mean? So I take the first one, so that means vector 1 to k, and I apply HKZ on the block starting at index 1 and finishing at index k. And then I take the next block, which is from 2 to k plus 1, and then I take the next block from 3 to k plus 2, and so on and so forth. And the last block is from n minus k plus 1 to n. So I've applied HKZ on any block going from the first to the last one. And once I'm done, when I've done the last block, I say I've done a tour, I've done a BKZ tour, and I start at index 1 again. So once I'm at the end, I start at the beginning again.
Does it saturate at some point?
Sorry?
Does it saturate at some point? Like
Does it terminate? Does it terminate?
More than terminate, like repeating does not help anymore.
Yes, so that's the main question, actually. That's the most important question related to BKZ. So, but I'm going to give the answer. So how many iterations and what is the output quality? So this algorithm was proposed by, actually it's not Schnorr's 87 algorithm. In 87, Schnorr proposed another algorithm for which he had a complexity analysis. So it was looking about the same, but a bit different, and in practice much less interesting. But he could do an analysis. And in 91, he proposed this algorithm in a paper with Euchner, but they didn't have an analysis. They just observed that for small block sizes, this runs very fast. Okay, so let's try to understand what BKZ does on the basis. So say I start with this shape of diagonal coefficients. So the logarithms of the diagonal coefficients, they decrease linearly. So the diagonal coefficients themselves decrease exponentially. So there is a constant factor between two consecutive diagonal coefficients. And it's not an unreasonable assumption, because that's what we can get easily as a preprocessing. So if you apply triple L, to name it, what you have in the end is a basis that looks like this. But we want to do better than just LLN. Okay, so I'm going to apply HKZ to this basis, and I'm going to assume, so that's what we call a regularity assumption, that each HKZ reduction gives a worst case HKZ profile. So we've seen this HKZ profile, it's concave and rather flat at the beginning and decreasing a bit faster at the end. Okay, and here my block size is 4. So I take the first 4 vectors and apply HKZ on them. So what does it mean? So first, the average should be the same, because HKZ preserves the determinant, so it preserves the product of the RIIs, so it preserves the sum of the xi's. So the average is the same, and then I apply to the average the HKZ profile. So I have the average, and I have a small offset given by the HKZ profile.
So then each block gives us the best solution, optimum solution in each block.
That's my assumption. It's not the best, it's actually the worst. It's the less flat of what you can get with HKZ. HKZ you could be lucky and get something really flat. But saying that you do better than Minkowski theorem. Here I'm assuming that I do the worst I can do, be the closest to Minkowski theorem for every possible index. It seems reasonable in practice. It's a reasonable practical model. Okay, so once I'm done with the first 4 vectors, I look at vector 2 to 5, I do the average, and I apply some small offset. I keep doing this, 3 to 6, and I do a full tour. And at the end of the tour, you can observe that, okay, it decreases still quite fast, but at least less fast than at the beginning. So the first one is smaller, and the last one is larger. So we are more balanced after one tour. Okay, so it's really, once you have HKZ, it's really a dummy algorithm. It's, you have a rolling pin, and you just roll over the sand pile. And so if you use a rolling pin on a daily basis, you'll know that it goes very fast. It's much better than fiddling with the pace with your finger at different locations. The rolling pin goes bloody fast. Okay, so let's analyze this. In fact, if you look at what a tour means, a tour applied to the x's is an affine transformation on the vector of the x's. So what is this affine transformation? Every time I do an average of x's, I multiply the x's by the all one matrix divided by the block size. So if I make the average of the x's, I just apply the all one matrix to the x's and divide by the block size. And the offset is adding to the x's a constant vector. So every local HKZ is an affine transformation on the x's. So if I do a full tour, I get an affine transformation on the x's. So we can do the computations. So A corresponds to the successive local averages, and gamma corresponds to the offsets. So gamma, and you can actually compute values for A. So for A, it's rather nice because it derives from the all-one matrix. And for gamma, it's a bit more cumbersome because it involves the root n factors that occur in Minkowski's theorem. So you can look for this, and that's the effect of one tour. And then once you've observed this, you can apply regular, standard mathematics tools to analyze the convergence, the speed of convergence, and the limit. So the limit is given by the fixed points, and that gives us a reducedness of the output. So if we do the computations, we get something like this. So we get something flat for almost all indices, and the rate of decrease is log k over k minus 1. So the more you increase k, the flatter it gets, because the rate of decrease gets closer to 0. And at the end, you have the shape of worst case HKZ reduced basis. So for the last block, you have a worst case HKZ reduced basis. And the speed of convergence is given by the eigenvalues of A transpose A. Okay, and so if you remember what A is about, the largest eigenvalue of A transpose A is 1, because A is doing successive averages. So if you have a constant x, applying A to x doesn't change x. So we are looking at the next largest eigenvalue, and the next largest eigenvalue is somewhat far from 1. It's at this distance of 1. So it means that every k squared over n squared tours, the distance to the fixed point is decreased by a factor 2. And this is for the logarithms of the RIIs. So for the actual RIIs, the decrease is extremely fast. So it's geometric for the logarithms, so for the RIIs themselves, there is a double exponential. So that's why it's super fast. Actually, the number of iterations you need with respect to the size, initial size of the RIIs, is a logarithm. Is a log of the RIIs. Okay, and one question would be, okay, so all this is nice because we have this nice regularity assumption at the beginning. There is a way to make this completely rigorous. So for this, I send you to a paper I co-authored with Guillaume Moreau and Xavier Pujol 2 years ago. And we managed to remove this regularity assumption. So it's interesting for oneself's confidence, but in practice, the model is very good. So the model is a very good practical model. Okay, so the state of the art for lattice reduction. So on one hand, we have HKZ, which achieves a very good B1 over nth root of the determinant, but it runs in exponential time. So if you are okay with paying this, that's the best you can get. And then if you want to pay a bit less, you have BKZ with block size k. So you pay HKZ in block size k, so 2 to the k, but the rest is polynomial. And what you get as an approximation factor is k to the big O of n over k. And finally, you have LLL, which is essentially BKZ for block size 2. And then you get an exponential approximation factor, but what you pay is only polynomial. Okay, so there is a rule of thumb. If you pay 2 to the k, you get approximation factor k to the n over k. Or even more crudely, you can say 2 to the k and 2 to the soft O of n over k. And this you can rewrite as following. If you want a given approximation factor, because what's interesting for you is not really the block size that you take, but the desired approximation factor. So if you rewrite this as a desired as a function of the cost, if you rewrite the cost as a function of the desired approximation factor, you get something like n over log gamma to the n over log gamma. Okay, so I'm going to apply this to solving the SIS problem. So the SIS problem, I think we are going to hear about it more today. So let me define it briefly. We have an A, which is rectangular. It's a matrix mod some integer q that has m rows and n columns. And I pick this A uniformly. And my goal is to find x integer such that xta 0 mod q. So this in itself is easy because I can just do linear algebra mod q. But I have this additional constraint that the norm of x is non-zero and is smaller or equal to beta. So I want a small vector such that xta is 0. And beta is a parameter of the problem. So this is used for building several cryptographic primitives, including signatures. And how do we attack it with lattices? So the best known generic attack asymptotically relies on lattices. So let's rewrite this as a lattice problem. So I want a short non-zero vector in that lattice. So I look at the set of x's such that xta is 0 mod q. So that forms a lattice. It's a sublattice of Zm. And actually, I can prove a few things on that lattice. So with very high probability, or probability very close to 1, the determinant is q to the n, and the dimension is m. So why is the dimension m? Because q times Zm is contained in that lattice. Okay, so now the question would be, I want to apply lattice reduction on this lattice L to find a short vector x, short non-zero vector x in L. So if I have a short non-zero vector, if its norm is smaller than beta, then I have a solution to SIS. So for this, I can apply the rule of thumb. So I have, if I'm ready to pay 2 to the big O of k, then I will get a vector whose norm is k to the big O of m over k times the dimensions root of the determinant. So I get k to the big O of m over k as approximation factor times the determinant to the 1 over m. Okay, and I want this to be smaller or equal to beta, because if it has to be smaller or equal to beta to be a solution to the problem. Okay, and when you have this formula, you can observe that as a function of m, this is increasing and this is decreasing. So there could be a best m to choose, and actually we can do it. So we can choose an m which is not the full m. So it means we can choose an m prime smaller than m, and just don't look at, so it means that given A, we don't look at all rows of A. We are playing with a subset of the rows, and we do lattice reduction on a subset of the rows. Okay, so my goal is to find the lowest k, so to pay the smallest amount of time, such that the minimum over all m prime smaller than m of this function is smaller than beta. So this is just applying the lattice reduction rule of thumb, and then we can solve for this formula. So in particular, if m is large, so if m is larger than this value, the optimal m prime is this value, and the k that we get, so the cost is 2 to the n log q times a factor linear in the previous one, divided by log squared beta. So this is the asymptotic cost of solving SIS with lattice reduction. So there is another famous, another important problem for lattice-based cryptography called LWE, and you can apply exactly the same proof, the same cost analysis to solving LWE. So in the end, what you get, if you have the regular LWE parameter, should be the same divided by log square alpha instead of log square beta. Okay, so I'm running a little bit out of time, so I'll go quick on the practical aspects. So what should be remembered is really 2 to the k as time for approximation factor k to the n over k. And the main practical question is what is hidden behind these big O's? Because in practice, I don't want big O's, I want actual figures so that I know the limits of these algorithms. So in practice, the best theoretical algorithms for SVP are exponential in theory, but in practice we don't use these ones because the asymptotically more consuming algorithms turn out to be faster in practice. So we use what's called the enumeration algorithm. And it's a fairly elementary algorithm given the upper triangular shape of R. So you look for all possible x's that would minimize the linear combination of a column of R, and you exploit the upper triangular shape. So there are many practical improvements to this. And the best, the order, to give you an order of magnitude, at the moment, n about 110 cost a few days on the desktop, and the current record is 130. So that's more expensive. And this is used in Nguyens and Shun's BKZ 2.0 algorithm, which is a state-of-the-art implementation of BKZ, but unfortunately unavailable as far as I know. And it uses a state-of-the-art SVP solver and BKZ with early termination, because we know that it converges very quickly to the fixed point, so we just stop it at some stage. And okay, so this asymptotic estimates become this in practice. So the current limit of lattice reduction with block size around 100 gives you this approximation factor, 1.0009 to the n. Okay, and if you do need lattice reduction in practice, then you can use this code, which is available on my webpage, but it's not as good as BKZ 2.0. So it has the advantage of being available. It's not. It's not. The other one?
No, the other one. They just didn't make it available.
They didn't make it available. Why? I don't know. I'm not. I'm not part of the group.
But you know how they do it.
The paper is fairly explicit. The paper is it gives a lot of details on what they do. So it's not implemented in FPLLL because these things take time to implement. Given an infinite amount of time, then I will. It's on the pile. Okay, so let me conclude. What to remember from this talk? Lattice reduction is used to solve the approximate variance of most lattice problems, SVP, USVP, HSVP, and so on. And the process is driven solely by the diagonal coefficients of the R factor, so that's all that matters in the process with respect to cost. For time 2 to the k, you get approximation factor essentially 2 to the n over k. And in practice, the current practical limit is at 1.009 to the n. So that's fairly small for a small n. If n is below, say 200, this is a small constant. But when n increases, then the exponential aspect of it kicks in. Okay, so some open problems. A very important open problem, especially with respect to practical lattice-based cryptography, is to get a precise understanding of the limits of the lattice reduction framework. Because this is the best known attack in practice. So if you want to set parameters against the best known practical attack, you have to know exactly how far this best practical attack goes. So you have to know the limits. So if you think of crypto based on factorization or on discrete log, there have been over the years lots and lots of energy spent on assessing the limits of the best known algorithms. So the number field sieve or discrete log algorithms for elliptic curves. In lattices, we are far behind. So the limit is less precise. And then one challenging open problem is to go beyond this general framework because the framework that I described, going with the RIIs and doing local improvements of the RIIs by using HKZ and so on, that's a framework which is 25 years old, that has not been improved significantly since then. So people have managed to clean it up and to decrease the constant factors and so on. But the framework is still the same. So is there a way to do things differently? So that's and possibly find a quantum acceleration to these algorithms. At the moment, there is no quantum acceleration known for these problems, apart from gaining sometimes a factor 2 in the exponent thanks to Grover's algorithms. But that's mainly it. So that's a very challenging problem. And if I summarize, if I make these two more compact, the main open problem in the end is to do better than this cost for a given approximation factor. Thank you for your attention.
Any quick questions?